The 67th floor of Van Dorn Tower gleamed with champagne and billion-dollar egos when 13-year-old Amara Cole walked in barefoot behind her mother, a cleaning woman. The billionaire noticed the poor black girl staring at his military-grade vault and decided to make her the punchline of his joke. "Open that safe," Elliot Van Dorn announced with a smirk, "and there's $100 million inside with your name on it." The room erupted in laughter. Phones lifted to record the humiliation. But there was one thing none of them knew about Amara Cole. Her father had built that safe before he mysteriously disappeared 7 years ago. And today, that joke was about to become the most expensive mistake of their lives. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The 67th floor of Van Dorn Tower gleamed like a jewel suspended above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the eastern wall, offering a view that made the streets below look like toy replicas of real life. Inside the executive boardroom, crystal chandeliers scattered light across polished marble floors, and champagne flutes clinked in rhythm with laughter that echoed too loudly in the space. Elliot Van Dorn stood at the center of it all, a man who wore his wealth like armor. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit tailored to emphasize the shoulders of someone who still believed physical presence mattered in a world he controlled with signatures and phone calls. Tonight was his 54th birthday, though the celebration felt less like a party and more like a ceremony where everyone came to worship at the altar of his success. "Gentlemen, ladies," Van Dorn raised his glass, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who expected to be heard. "Another year, another billion. I'd say I'm blessed, but we all know I earned every damn penny." The board members laughed on cue. There were 12 of them scattered around the room, men and women in expensive clothing who had learned long ago that proximity to power required a certain performance. They nodded at his jokes, agreed with his observations, and never, ever questioned his decisions. Near the back corner of the room, almost invisible against the darkened windows, stood Miriam Cole. She wore the gray uniform of the building's cleaning service, her hands clasped in front of her as she waited for permission to slip out unnoticed. The party had run late, and she had been told to stay until the guests left so she could begin the overnight cleaning shift. Her supervisor had been clear about that. What her supervisor hadn't accounted for was Amara. The 13-year-old girl sat on the floor just outside the boardroom entrance, her back against the wall and her bare feet tucked beneath her worn dress. She had waited for her mother for 3 hours now, patient in the way children become when they learn early that complaining changes nothing. Her dark eyes watched the hallway with quiet attention, taking in details most people never noticed. The way the elevator chimed differently depending on which floor it came from. The pattern of footsteps that told her when security guards were making their rounds. The smell of expensive food drifting from the boardroom, so different from the rice and beans waiting for them at home. Inside the boardroom, someone whistled sharply. "Hey, what's that?" For men in dark suits wheeled something massive through the double doors. It took all of them to maneuver it, their movements careful and coordinated. The object was covered with a black cloth, but its shape was unmistakable, a cube, roughly 6 feet on each side, sitting on a reinforced cart that looked like it belonged in a museum. Van Dorn's smile widened. Perfect timing. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you a demonstration tonight. Something to remind us all why we're in the business of keeping secrets." He gestured dramatically, and the men pulled away the cloth. The vault gleamed under the chandelier light. It was military grade. That much was obvious even to those who knew nothing about security. The door was seamless brushed steel, interrupted only by a complex locking mechanism that looked more like art than engineering. Digital panels flanked both sides, their screens dark and waiting. The hinges, if there were any, remained invisible. "Custom-built," Van Dorn announced, walking a slow circle around it. "Rated to withstand explosives, drilling, thermal attacks, and electronic intrusion. There are maybe 6 people in the world who could crack this thing, and I pay 5 of them." He paused for the laugh he knew would come. "The 6th one doesn't return my calls." Amara heard the commotion and tilted her head, trying to see through the doorway. The angle was wrong, but she caught glimpses, polished shoes, champagne glasses, and something large and metallic that reflected the light in strange ways. She stood slowly, her curiosity overcoming her training to stay invisible. 3 steps brought her to the doorway, where she could finally see what had drawn everyone's attention. The safe. She stared at it with an intensity that didn't belong on a child's face. Her eyes traced the seams, the angles, the way the locking mechanism protruded just slightly from the surface. She noticed the ventilation slots near the base, barely visible unless you were looking from below. She noticed the way the digital panels were positioned, symmetrical but not quite identical. Miriam saw her daughter and felt her stomach drop. She moved quickly, trying to reach Amara before anyone noticed, but she was too late. Well, Van Dorn's voice cut through the chatter. Looks like we have an uninvited guest. Everyone turned. 12 board members, for security personnel, and half a dozen servers all focused their attention on the barefoot black girl standing in the doorway. Amara met their stares without flinching. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made things worse. Van Dorn walked toward her, his smile still in place, but his eyes calculating. He glanced at Miriam, then back at Amara, piecing together the connection. "This your daughter?" he asked Miriam, though his attention never left Amara. Miriam nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry." She was waiting in the hall. "I'll take her downstairs right now." No, it's fine," Van Dorn said, waving a dismissive hand. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to Amara's eye level, though the gesture felt more condescending than kind. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Amara. Pretty name." He straightened up, addressing the room now rather than the child. "You know what? I think Amara here just gave me an idea." Several board members exchanged glances. They knew that tone. It meant Van Dorn was about to do something he found amusing, and they would be expected to laugh. Van Dorn gestured grandly at the safe. "See that, Amara? That beautiful piece of engineering right there." He walked back to it, placing one hand on its surface like a proud parent. "Inside this vault, there's a very special surprise. $100 million, sitting in neat stacks, just waiting for someone clever enough to claim it." The room went quiet, everyone waiting to see where this was going. Van Dorn turned back to Amara, his smile widening. "Tell you what, you open that safe, and every penny inside is yours. $100 million. Think about what your mama could do with that kind of money. New house, new car, never have to clean another toilet for the rest of her life." The laughter started small, just a few chuckles from the back of the room, but it grew quickly. Someone pulled out their phone, already recording. Others joined in, their cameras pointed at the barefoot girl and the impossible safe. Miriam's face burned with shame. She reached for Amara's hand. "Please, sir, we should go." "I'm not stopping you," Van Dorn said, his tone light, but his eyes hard. "But the offer stands. Open it, Amara. Show us how smart you are." Amara didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes remained fixed on the safe, studying it with an attention that made some of the laughter die in people's throats. Near the windows, a man who had been silent all evening straightened in his chair. Zahir al-Rashid was not white like most of the others in the room, his darker skin and accent marking him as foreign, though his wealth made him welcome in spaces that might otherwise have excluded him. He wore his expensive suit with the ease of someone who had grown up with money, but his eyes held something the others lacked, genuine curiosity rather than casual cruelty. He watched Amara watch the safe, and something in her posture troubled him. Caleb Wright, Van Dorn's head of security, stood near the door with his arms crossed. He was ex-intelligence, the kind of man who had seen enough of the world's ugliness to recognize when something felt wrong. He had been hired to protect Van Dorn from external threats, but lately he had begun to wonder if the biggest threat was the man himself. He noticed Amara's gaze, the way she wasn't looking at the door or the locking mechanism, but at the edges, the seams, the places where the safe met its housing. "Does it open from pressure?" Amara said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the room, or timing. The laughter stopped. Van Dorn blinked, his smile frozen in place. "What did you say?" Amara looked at him directly for the first time. "The safe. Does the lock respond to pressure sensors? Or is it on a timing mechanism? Several board members exchanged confused glances. It was the kind of question that shouldn't come from a 13-year-old girl in a worn dress. Van Dorn's amusement returned, but now it had an edge to it. "Why don't you come here and find out?" He gestured toward the safe, an invitation that felt more like a dare. Miriam tightened her grip on Amara's hand. "We need to go." Amara looked up at her mother, and something passed between them. A conversation without words, the kind that happens between people who have learned to communicate in silence. Miriam's eyes pleaded. Amara's eyes apologized. Then Amara gently pulled her hand free and took one step toward the safe. Zahir sat forward in his chair, his casual posture replaced by sudden attention. Caleb moved closer, positioning himself where he could intervene if needed, though he wasn't sure what kind of intervention would make sense. The room held its breath. Amara's bare feet made no sound on the marble floor as she crossed the boardroom. The distance between the doorway and the safe couldn't have been more than 20 feet, but she walked it slowly, as if each step required consideration. Her hands hung loose at her sides, not clenched or nervous, just present. The executives watched with the same fascination people show at car accidents, horrified but unable to look away. Their phones captured every moment, uploading to private group chats and social media feeds where the spectacle would be judged, shared, and forgotten by morning. Van Dorn stood beside the safe with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of amusement and anticipation. He had orchestrated this moment for his own entertainment, a story he could tell at future parties about the time a poor kid tried to crack his vault. But Amara wasn't looking at Van Dorn. She had already dismissed him as irrelevant to the problem at hand. She stopped 3 feet from the safe, close enough to see it clearly, but not touching distance. Her eyes moved in a pattern that seemed random at first, down to the base, up to the locking mechanism, across to the digital panels, back to the seams where the door met the frame. "Is this a prank?" Someone whispered from the back of the room. "Someone get her some shoes," another voice added, generating scattered laughter. Amara ignored them all. She tilted her head slightly, listening. The room was noisy with whispered commentary and the ambient hum of expensive electronics, but she seemed to be hearing something beneath it all. Zahir noticed the tilt of her head and frowned. He had seen that posture before, years ago, in another country during a demonstration of acoustic security systems. The engineer who had presented that day had explained that certain locks could be decoded by listening to the internal mechanisms, counting the intervals between sounds that most people couldn't even detect. That engineer had been brilliant. That engineer had also vanished under circumstances that Zahir had chosen not to investigate too closely. Amara closed her eyes. The room went quieter, people sensing that something was happening even if they couldn't articulate what. She was counting. The realization hit Zahir like cold water. She was listening to the building itself, the air circulation, the electrical systems, the minute vibrations that came from machinery running in the walls. She was using the ambient noise as a baseline, filtering it out to hear what didn't belong. A memory flickered behind Amara's eyes, uninvited but persistent. She was younger, maybe 8 years old, sitting under a table in a stranger's house. Men in suits argued above her, their voices loud and angry. One of them slammed his hand on the table, making her flinch. "The timing is wrong," a familiar voice said. Her father's voice. "The pressure differential will cause a seal failure. You can't rush this kind of work. We're not paying you to tell us what we can't do," another man replied coldly. The memory fragmented, replaced by another. Her father at their kitchen table late at night, showing her a drawing of gears and locks. "See this, baby girl? Every lock tells a story. You just have to know how to listen." Amara opened her eyes. Miriam stood frozen by the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She wanted to call out, to stop this, but some part of her knew it was already too late. Amara had inherited too much from her father. The curiosity, the inability to leave problems unsolved, the dangerous tendency to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Amara took another step forward, bringing her within arm's reach of the safe. Her fingers hovered near the surface but didn't touch. "What's she doing?" someone asked. "Stalling," Van Dorn said with a chuckle. Classic move. Make it look mysterious, then claim it's impossible. But Caleb wasn't laughing. He had worked in intelligence long enough to recognize genuine analysis when he saw it. The girl wasn't performing. She was problem-solving. Amara's hand moved to the left side of the safe, fingers tracing the air an inch above the surface. She followed the line of the digital panel down to where it met the ventilation slots, then across to the corresponding panel on the right side. They're not aligned, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. What? Van Dorn's smile faltered slightly. Amara straightened and looked at him. The panels. They should be perfectly symmetrical if it's a standard dual authentication system. But the left one sits 2 millimeters higher than the right one. Several board members glanced at each other. How could she possibly see a 2-millimeter difference from that distance? So what? Van Dorn said, his tone sharper now. It's a design choice. Maybe, Amara agreed. She moved around to the side of the safe, crouching down to examine the ventilation slots near the base. There were 6 of them, each about an inch wide, arranged in 2 rows of 3. She pressed her ear close to the slots, not quite touching the metal. Someone in the room actually snorted. Oh, come on. What is she, a cartoon character? More laughter, but sounded forced now, performative. People were starting to feel uncomfortable without understanding why. Amara stayed in that position for nearly 30 seconds, her breathing slow and even. Then she stood up and moved to the other side, repeating the process. Caleb watched her movements and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The ventilation pattern wasn't standard. He knew that because he had supervised the vault's installation personally 6 months ago. The manufacturer had explained that the unusual configuration was necessary due to internal climate requirements. But at the time, Caleb hadn't questioned it. Van Dorn wanted the best security money could buy, and unconventional solutions were part of that package. Now, watching this barefoot girl examine those same vents with focused intensity, Caleb began to wonder what else he hadn't questioned. Amara moved back to the front of the safe. This time, she did touch it, placing both palms flat against the door. Her hands were small, her fingers spread wide to cover as much surface area as possible. She tapped twice with her right index finger. The sound was soft, barely audible. She waited, counting silently in her head. 1, 2, 3. Then she tapped again with her left index finger. Same force, same duration. Something inside the safe responded. Not a full mechanical engagement, just a subtle shift in air pressure that created the faintest of sounds, a whisper of metal on metal, there and gone in less than a second. But Amara heard it, and so did Zahir. The older man stood abruptly from his chair, his movement sudden enough that several people turned to look at him. He stared at the safe, then at Amara, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to alarm. Wait, Zahir said, his accented voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Stop this. Van Dorn frowned at him. Stop what? She's just playing around. No, Zahir said slowly, his eyes never leaving Amara. She's not. The room's attention shifted between Zahir and the girl, trying to understand what they were missing. Amara stepped back from the safe, her hands returning to her sides. She looked tired suddenly, as if the brief contact had drained something from her. Phones lowered slightly. The amusement that had driven people to record was beginning to curdle into uncertainty. Van Dorn's jaw tightened. His birthday spectacle was slipping away from him, turning into something he didn't control. Okay, enough games. Either open it or admit you can't. Amara looked at him with those 2 old eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. It's not empty. Van Dorn forced a laugh, but came out wrong. Of course it's not empty. That's the whole joke. There's $100 million inside, remember? Amara shook her head slowly. No, I mean it wasn't built for money. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Caleb felt his hand move instinctively toward his radio, though he had no clear reason to call for backup. Not yet. Van Dorn's face flushed red. What the hell are you talking about? Before Amara could answer, Zahir spoke again. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent to it that made everyone pay attention. Let her finish. Van Dorn spun to face him. This is ridiculous. She's a child making up nonsense to sound smart. Then what's the harm in letting her explain? Zahir replied evenly. Amara didn't wait for permission. She pointed at the ventilation slots she had examined earlier. The airflow is wrong, she said. Those vents are designed for continuous circulation, not storage. And the way they're positioned, they create a specific pressure differential that would keep humidity stable and temperature controlled. You don't need that for paper money. Cash doesn't need climate control like that. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. They didn't understand the technical details, but they understood the implication. This girl knew things she shouldn't. Amara continued, gaining confidence as she spoke. The locking mechanism has a timing lag. I felt it when I tapped. The response came 3.2 seconds after initial contact. That's not normal for a modern vault system. Standard digital locks respond in under half a second. The only reason for a delay like that is if the system is processing something else first. Some kind of authentication sequence that runs before it evaluates the lock attempt. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. She was right. The manufacturer had mentioned a proprietary authentication protocol, something about enhanced security through temporal displacement of response patterns. At the time, it had sounded like technical jargon designed to justify a higher price tag. Now it sounded like evidence. In the panels, Amara added, pointing at the misaligned digital displays. They're not misaligned because of poor installation. They're offset because there's something between the outer casing and the actual vault door. Extra space. Hidden. The room was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the building seemed to fade, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Van Dorn's face had gone from red to pale. His fists clenched at his sides. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Amara looked at him with something that might have been pity. My father taught me how to listen to locks, she said quietly. He taught me how to find the spaces that aren't supposed to be there, how to hear when something's been sealed too fast before it was ready. Another memory surfaced, sharper this time. Her father's voice, tense and frightened, on a phone call late at night. I'm not signing off on this. The seal integrity is compromised. If you close it now, everything inside will be contaminated. Legally, I can't certify this work. The voice on the other end said something she couldn't make out. Her father's response was quiet but firm. Then find someone else. I'm not destroying evidence for you. 2 days later, he didn't come home. Amara blinked, pulling herself back to the present. The boardroom, the safe, the watching faces. Miriam had moved closer without realizing it, drawn by maternal instinct, even though she knew she couldn't protect her daughter from whatever was happening here. Caleb made a decision. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Amara and Van Dorn, his body language protective, even though he wasn't sure who he was protecting or from what. Mr. Van Dorn, Caleb said carefully, maybe we should pause this demonstration. Pause. Van Dorn's voice rose. This is my party, my building, my safe. I'm not pausing anything because a janitor's kid wants to play detective. But Zahir had moved too, circling around the safe to examine it from a different angle. His face was troubled, memory working behind his eyes. This design, he said slowly, tracing a finger through the air near the vault's surface without touching it. I've seen something like this before. Years ago, a prototype for evidence custody, designed to preserve digital media and documents in transit during criminal investigations. Van Dorn opened his mouth, then closed it again. Amara turned to face Zahir fully for the first time, really looking at him. Recognition flickered in her eyes, though they had never met. My father built safes like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he disappeared. The word disappeared hung in the air like smoke. Miriam made a small sound, almost a sob, quickly suppressed. Zahir stared at Amara, pieces clicking into place in his mind. The timing, the design, the little girl who understood security systems that most engineers couldn't fully grasp. What was your father's name? Zahir asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. Marcus Cole, Amara said. He died 7 years ago. They said it was suicide. Caleb's hand tightened on his radio. That name appeared in classified reports he had been given when he first took this job. Reports marked as closed cases, nothing to investigate, move along. Van Dorn's face had gone completely white. Amara looked back at the safe one more time, her small hand reaching out as if to touch it again, then falling to her side. "But I don't think he died," she whispered. "I think someone made him disappear. Someone who didn't want him to tell the truth about what was inside safes like this one." She turned and looked directly at Van Dorn, her 13-year-old eyes holding the gaze of a man worth billions. "Someone like you." The accusation hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Amara's final words from the previous moment still echoed in the silent boardroom. "Someone like you." Van Dorn recovered first, his businessman instincts overriding the shock. He laughed, but the sound came out forced, mechanical. "Marcus Cole? That's ancient history. The man had mental health issues. Everyone knew it. Tragic case, really, but it has nothing to do with me or this safe." He waved his hand dismissively, trying to reclaim control of the room. "This is getting absurd. I invite this child in as a joke, and now she's throwing around conspiracy theories about her father's suicide? Someone needs to teach her the difference between grief and reality." But the board members weren't laughing anymore. They shifted in their seats, glancing at each other with the kind of nervous energy that comes from sensing danger without understanding its source. Several had already started calculating exit strategies, mentally reviewing their own involvement in Van Dorn's business dealings. Amara didn't flinch at Van Dorn's words. She had heard worse, lived through worse. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "My father did have problems, but they started after he met you." Miriam moved forward, her cleaner's uniform suddenly feeling like a costume she was tired of wearing. "Amara, we need to go. Now." But Caleb stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Wait, let her speak." Van Dorn spun to face his head of security. "Excuse me? You work for me, Caleb, not for conspiracy theories." Caleb met his employer's glare without backing down. "I work for the truth, sir. And right now, I'd like to hear what she has to say." The shift in the room was palpable. Van Dorn's control was slipping, and everyone could feel it. Zahir had moved closer to the safe, his eyes tracing the same patterns Amara had examined. His fingers hovered near the ventilation slots, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that demanded attention. "The girl is correct about the design," he said. "This is not a standard secure storage vault. The climate control system, the authentication delay, the reinforced housing with hidden gaps. These are specifications for evidence transport and preservation." He turned to face Van Dorn directly. "I should know. I helped fund the research that developed this technology." The revelation sent a ripple through the room. Board members exchanged sharp glances. Phones that had been lowered now rose again, recording with renewed purpose. Van Dorn's jaw clenched. That was a legitimate business investment. "You're a sovereign wealth fund manager, Zahir. You invest in security technology all the time." "I do," Zahir agreed. "But this particular project was supposed to be destroyed. The prototype was deemed too sophisticated, too easily corruptible. We agreed, all of us who funded it, that the technology would be buried. Yet here it stands, in your boardroom, very much alive." Amara listened to this exchange with focused intensity, adding pieces to a puzzle she had been assembling for years. "The prototype wasn't destroyed," she said. "My father refused to let that happen. He said the research was too important, that someday it might be needed for good purposes." Another memory surfaced. Her father at the dinner table, looking exhausted. Her mother asking what was wrong. "They want me to erase everything," Marcus had said. "All the documentation, all the blueprints. But I made copies, just in case." "In case of what?" Miriam had asked. Marcus had looked at his daughter then, his eyes sad. "In case someone ever needs proof." Amara shook herself back to the present. "He kept copies of everything. Specifications, correspondence, contracts. He hid them where he thought they'd be safe." Van Dorn laughed again, but this time it carried an edge of desperation. "And where would that be? If such copies even existed, which I doubt, they'd be long gone by now." Amara looked at the safe again, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Not gone. Sealed. That's what this is about, isn't it? You didn't build this vault to store money. You built it to store evidence. Evidence that my father collected about you. Caleb felt his world tilting. Pieces of classified reports, strange orders from 7 years ago, questions he had been told not to ask, they all suddenly aligned into a pattern he couldn't ignore. The authentication delay, Caleb said slowly, working through the implications. It's not just for security. It's syncing with something, verifying data integrity before it allows access. Amara nodded. Digital evidence degrades if it's not properly maintained. The climate control prevents physical degradation. The sync process prevents digital corruption. But if you seal it before the sync completes, the data becomes corrupted. Zahir finished, his face grave. Legally inadmissible. Technically worthless. A perfect way to destroy evidence while appearing to preserve it. Van Dorn's face had cycled from pale to red and back to pale again. His fists clenched at his sides. This is ridiculous. You're building an entire fantasy based on the ramblings of a disturbed child and half-remembered investments from years ago. But his board members were watching him now with different eyes. The people who had spent years agreeing with everything he said were suddenly seeing him as a liability. One of them, a woman named Patricia Holbrook with silver hair and sharp features, stood up. Elliot, I think we should pause this celebration. Perhaps continue in private. Sit down, Patricia, Van Dorn snapped. I'm not being intimidated by a child's ghost stories. Patricia remained standing. It's not about intimidation. It's about due diligence. If there's even a possibility that this vault contains evidence of, she paused, choosing words carefully, irregularities, then we need to address it properly. Other board members began to stand as well, moving toward the exits with the practiced efficiency of people abandoning a sinking ship. Van Dorn's voice rose. Nobody leaves. This is my building, my company, and you all seem to be forgetting that your wealth is tied to mine. You walk out that door. You walk away from everything you've built. The threat hung heavy, but several board members kept walking. They had done the math. Whatever damage leaving might cause, staying could be worse. Amara watched the exodus with a strange sense of detachment. She hadn't planned any of this, hadn't wanted this attention. She had simply been waiting for her mother to finish work, curious about a safe that reminded her of her father's drawings. Now the entire room was fracturing, and she stood at the center of it. Caleb made a decision. He pulled out his radio and spoke clearly. Building security, this is right. Lock down the executive floor. Nobody enters or leaves without my authorization. Van Dorn stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? My job, Caleb replied. Protecting the integrity of potential evidence. The remaining board members froze at the doors, finding them already sealed. Electronic locks engaged with soft clicks. Red lights appeared above the exits. You can't do this, Van Dorn said, his voice shaking now. You work for me. Caleb's expression was hard. I work for the law, Mr. Van Dorn. I took an oath a long time ago, before I took your money. And right now, that oath is telling me something very wrong happened here. Van Dorn turned to Zahir, desperate now. You're part of this too. You funded the research. If there's something illegal about this vault, your fingerprints are all over it. Zahir nodded slowly. Perhaps they are, but unlike you, I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my attorneys. I suggest you do the same. Attorneys? Van Dorn's voice cracked. For what? Nobody's been accused of anything. There's no crime here. Then you have nothing to worry about, Caleb said evenly. Open the safe. Show us the $100 million you promised. Prove this whole thing is exactly what you said it was, a joke at a birthday party. The challenge sat between them like a chess piece waiting to be moved. Van Dorn looked at the safe, at Amara, at the watching faces around the room. His mind raced through options, each one narrowing his path forward. Finally, he turned back to Amara, his voice dropping to something almost pleading. You're just a child. You don't understand what you're doing. The kind of people involved in situations like this, if there even was a situation, which I'm not admitting, they don't play nice. You think you're uncovering some great truth, but all you're doing is putting yourself and your mother in danger. Miriam inhaled sharply, fear flooding her features. She had spent 7 years trying to keep Amara safe, trying to stay invisible. Now her daughter was standing in front of powerful men, pulling at threads that could unravel both their lives. But Amara didn't look afraid. She looked tired. "We've been in danger my whole life," she said quietly. "Running, hiding, pretending we didn't exist. My mother works 3 jobs to keep us invisible. We've moved 6 times in 7 years. I don't even know what it feels like to have friends or a permanent home." She took a step toward Van Dorn, her small frame somehow commanding the space. "So when you talk about danger, Mr. Van Dorn, understand that I've lived with it every single day since my father disappeared. The only difference now is that maybe, finally, I can find out why." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even the board members who had been trying to leave stopped, transfixed by the raw honesty in the girl's voice. Zahir's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then looked up at Caleb. "My security team is reporting unusual activity. 3 vehicles just entered the parking garage. They're not on any guest list." Caleb's hand went to his radio again. "Ground floor security reports status." Static answered him. He tried again. "Any station, this is right. Report." More static. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. In his years of intelligence work, he had learned to trust that feeling. It meant something was very wrong. Van Dorn's face had changed. The desperation was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "You should have taken the money when I offered it, Amara. You should have played along with the joke, laughed with everyone else, and gone home with your mother." There was something in his tone that made Caleb move instinctively, positioning himself between Van Dorn and the girl. "What did you do?" Caleb asked quietly. Van Dorn smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I made a phone call. While you were all so focused on the girl's little performance, I sent a message to people who know how to handle situations like this." Miriam grabbed Amara's hand, pulling her daughter close. "We need to leave. Now. The doors are locked," Patricia Holbrook said, her voice tight with fear. He said so himself. Caleb was already moving, his training overriding everything else. He reached the nearest door and manually overrode the electronic lock using his security credentials. The door opened, revealing an empty hallway. "Everyone out," he ordered. "Take the stairs, not the elevators. Get to ground level and exit through the north entrance." Board members didn't need to be told twice. They fled into the hallway, their expensive shoes clicking against marble as they ran. Caleb turned back to the room. "You too, both of you." But Amara was staring at the safe again, her expression strange. "It's going to open." Everyone stopped. "What?" Zahir asked. Amara moved closer to the vault, her bare feet silent. The seal was incomplete. "My father said incomplete seals create instability. The authentication system tries to compensate, but eventually the pressure differential becomes too great. The internal mechanism has to equalize." She placed her hand flat against the safe surface, feeling something the others couldn't. "It's been trying to open for a long time. Years, probably." The failsafe finally triggered. Caleb checked his watch. When Amara closed her eyes, counting something in her head. 6 minutes. Maybe less. The room erupted in chaos. Van Dorn lunged forward, grabbing Amara's arm. "What do you mean it's going to open? That's impossible. The vault requires 3 separate authentication protocols. Nobody has the codes except." He stopped, realization dawning on his face. Amara pulled her arm free, rubbing where his fingers had gripped too tightly. "Except the person who designed it. My father built in a failsafe. He told me about it once, years ago. I thought he was just telling stories." Another memory crystallized. Her father tucking her into bed, his voice soft in the darkness. "Listen, baby girl, if something ever happens to me, you need to remember this. Every system I build has a way out, a door that opens when everything else fails. But you have to be patient. You have to wait for the right moment." "How do you know when it's the right moment?" young Amara had asked. Marcus had smiled sadly. "When the truth can't stay buried anymore. The machine knows. It counts time differently than we do." Present-day Amara opened her eyes, her father's words finally making sense. He programmed a timer, based on thermal cycles and pressure differentials. If the seal remained incomplete, if the vault was never properly secured, the mechanism would eventually force a release. Not immediately, not in a way anyone would notice, but gradually, over years, building toward an inevitable opening. Zahir's face had gone pale. That's brilliant and terrifying. Your father essentially built a time bomb, except instead of exploding, it reveals. How long? Caleb demanded. You said 6 minutes. How accurate is that? Amara tilted her head, listening again. 5 minutes now? Maybe 4. The internal mechanisms are accelerating. You can hear it if you know what to listen for. Van Dorn stumbled backward, his carefully constructed composure completely shattered. No, this can't happen. Not here. Not now. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, dialing frantically. The situation's changed. The vault's compromised. I need full extraction protocols. Yes, now. I don't care about the witnesses. He looked up, meeting Caleb's hard stare. Just get here. Caleb's hand went to the weapon he kept holstered beneath his jacket. End that call. Now. Or what? Van Dorn's voice had taken on a manic edge. You'll shoot me? In front of all these people? You're supposed to be the good guy, Caleb. The ex-intelligence officer with a conscience. That's why I hired you. I needed someone who looked clean. You hired me because you thought I was dirty enough to ignore the truth when it mattered. Caleb corrected. You were wrong. Patricia Holbrook, who had been edging toward the exit, suddenly spoke up. Elliot, whatever's in that safe, whatever mistakes were made, they can be managed. Lawyers, settlements, legal strategies. But calling in whoever you just called, that's crossing a line we can't come back from. Shut up, Patricia, Van Dorn snapped. You don't understand what's at stake. Then explain it, Zahir said, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone pause. If you have any honor left, explain what's in that vault that's worth threatening children and calling in extraction teams. Van Dorn laughed bitterly. Honor? You want to talk about honor? You funded black site security systems, Zahir. You've built vaults for dictators and weapons manufacturers. Don't pretend your hands are clean. They're not, Zahir agreed quietly, which is why I know exactly what kind of evidence that safe might contain. Financial transactions that trace through networks designed to be untraceable. Proof of bribes, arms deals, manufactured economic collapses that enriched a few while destroying many. He looked at Amara, something like regret in his eyes. Your father was better than us. He tried to stop it. We should have listened. Amara felt her mother's grip tighten on her hand. Miriam's voice shook when she spoke. Marcus tried to tell me. The night before he disappeared, he said he had proof of something terrible. He said he was going to authorities, that he couldn't be part of it anymore. I begged him to stay quiet, to think about our family. Tears streamed down her face. I thought if we just kept our heads down, if we didn't make trouble, we'd be safe. But we were never safe. They just let us run. Because they couldn't find what Marcus had hidden, Caleb said, the pieces falling into place. They searched everywhere, his office, your home, his computer systems. But they never found the copies he made. Because he put them where nobody would think to look, Amara said softly. Inside the prototype. He sealed them in during the final assembly, before the vault was completed. That's why the sync never finished. The data was still uploading when Van Dorn tried to close it early. Van Dorn's phone rang. He answered it without taking his eyes off the group. What? Already? No, keep them downstairs. I need more time. He ended the call and turned to Amara with something desperate in his eyes. I'm going to make you an offer. One time only. Walk away right now. Take your mother, leave the city, and I'll deposit $100 million in any account you specify. Real money. Life-changing money. You can go anywhere, be anyone, forget all of this ever happened. Amara studied his face with the same intensity she had given the safe. You're scared. Impragmatic. Bandorm correcta. You're a smart girl, Amara. Smart enough to know that truth without power is just noise. I have power. The people I work with have power. Whatever's in that safe, it can be managed, contained, explained away. But only if we control the narrative. And if I don't take your money? Van Dorn's mask slipped further. Then you're choosing to destroy yourself along with me. Because I promise you, child, if that vault opens, if its contents become public, There will be consequences you can't imagine. Not just for me. For everyone in this room. For your mother. For you. The room had gone completely silent. Even the building's ambient noise seemed to have faded, leaving only the tick of time passing and the subtle sounds of mechanisms moving deep within the vault. Caleb spoke into his radio again, using an emergency frequency. "This is right, badge number 77392. I'm declaring a federal security incident on the 67th floor of Van Dorn Tower. Requesting immediate response from." The radio died mid-transmission, its display going dark. "They're jamming communications," Caleb said grimly. He looked at Zahir. "Your security team. Can they reach authorities?" Zahir checked his phone, his face darkening. "No signal. They're blocking the entire building." Patricia Holbrook sank into a chair, her face ashen. "Oh God, this is really happening." Miriam pulled Amara toward the door. "We're leaving. I don't care what's in the safe. I don't care about the money. We're leaving right now." But Amara resisted, her feet planted. "Mom, we can't run anymore. Don't you see? This is what Dad wanted. This is why he built the failsafe. He knew someday, somehow, the truth would come out. We just have to be here when it does." "No," Miriam said fiercely. "Your father's dead because he chose truth over family. I'm not losing you too." The words hit like a physical blow. Amara looked at her mother, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. The exhaustion, the fear, the years of survival that had worn her down to a brittle edge. "Mom," Amara said gently, "we were never safe. Running didn't protect us. It just delayed this moment." The vault made a sound then, a deep metallic groan that vibrated through the floor. Everyone turned to look at it. 3 minutes, Amara whispered. Van Dorn pulled out his phone again, but this time he didn't dial. Instead, he opened a banking app, his fingers flying across the screen. 10 million. Right now. I just need an account number. 20 million. 30. Name your price. Amara shook her head slowly. You still don't understand. This isn't about money. Everything's about money, Van Dorn said desperately. Power, security, freedom, it all comes down to money. I'm offering you more than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Take it. My father died because he wouldn't take money like that, Amara said, because he knew some things can't be bought or sold. Van Dorn's face twisted with rage and fear. Your father died because he was a fool who thought principles mattered more than survival. Look where his principles got him. Dead in a hotel room with a bottle of pills and a suicide note. Miriam flinched. Amara's hands clenched into fists. He didn't write that note, Amara said, her voice shaking. His handwriting was all wrong. The signature didn't match. I kept the papers, compared them to his real writing. Someone else wrote that note. She took a step toward Van Dorn, her young voice carrying a weight that shouldn't have been possible. Someone killed my father and made it look like suicide. And I think you know exactly who did it. The vault groaned again, louder this time. Visible vibrations ran through its surface. Caleb moved to the door, checking the hallway. We have company. Multiple armed individuals moving up the emergency stairs. Zahir's jaw tightened. My security team? I don't think so, Caleb replied. These move like professionals. Military bearing. Van Dorn's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and something in his expression changed. The desperation faded, replaced by cold calculation. $50 million, Amara. Final offer. Take it and leave through the service elevator. My people will hold position for 5 minutes. And if I refuse? Van Dorn met her eyes with something that might have been regret or might have been threat. Then what happens next is on you. The vault made a clicking sound, deep and rhythmic. A release mechanism engaging. Everyone in the room could hear it now. Amara looked at the safe one last time, then at her mother's frightened face, then at Caleb and Zahir and the remaining board members who were watching this confrontation like spectators at an execution. She thought about her father's voice, teaching her to listen to locks, teaching her that every system tells a story if you know how to hear it. She thought about 7 years of running, of being invisible, of watching her mother work herself to exhaustion to keep them safe. She thought about the truth and what it cost and whether some things were worth any price. I don't want your money, Amara said clearly. I never did. She turned to face Zahir directly, her next words changing everything. But I could tell you who does. Who is supposed to pay for the evidence to disappear. Who funded the whole operation. Zahir's face remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Acceptance. Amara's voice was steady when she delivered the line that would ensure there was no going back. You already paid for it once. My father told me about the wire transfer. $500 million, sent through 4 different accounts. You thought you were buying silence. She paused, letting the words sink in. But my father kept the transaction records, and they're in that safe. Zahir closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, his whole posture had changed. The composed magnate was gone, replaced by a man facing the consequences of old choices. Yes, he said simply. I did. The admission shattered what remained of the room's fragile order. Patricia Holbrook gasped. Other board members began shouting questions. Van Dorn stared at Zahir with betrayal in his eyes. But Amara wasn't finished. She looked at Van Dorn one more time. He paid you to bury the truth. But you got greedy. You kept the evidence, thinking you could use it later, leverage it for more money or protection. That's why you couldn't just destroy the vault. That's why you've been protecting it all these years. The vault clicked again. A seal releasing. Time running out. Van Dorn's phone buzzed insistently. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Multiple people moving fast. 2 minutes, Amara said quietly, and the world held its breath. The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Zahir had admitted to the payment, $500 million exchanged for silence. And now everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing something far beyond a birthday party gone wrong. Van Dorn's face had transformed from desperate to dangerous. You fool, he hissed at Zahir. You just implicated yourself in front of witnesses. Everything you've built, your reputation, your family's legacy, you threw it all away for what? A child's accusation? Zahir's expression remained calm, though his hands trembled slightly. I threw it away 7 years ago when I chose money over conscience. This is simply the bill coming due. The vault groaned again, its internal mechanisms accelerating toward the inevitable release. The sound had become constant now, a low mechanical hum that everyone could feel in their bones. Caleb moved away from the door, positioning himself where he could see both the vault and the hallway. We have maybe 90 seconds before that opens, and maybe 3 minutes before whoever's in the stairwell reaches this floor. We need a plan. The plan is simple, Van Dorn said coldly. We leave, all of us, right now. Let the vault open to an empty room. Whatever's inside stays contained until my legal team can handle it. Patricia Holbrook shook her head, her earlier fear replaced by something harder. It's too late for that, Elliot. The moment you called in armed security, you made this something we can't walk away from. Federal buildings don't get locked down without investigations. People don't jam communications without consequences. She's right, Caleb added. Even if we run, this doesn't end. Too many people saw what happened here. Too many phones recorded it. The truth is already out there, distributed across networks that can't be erased. Van Dorn's laugh was bitter. The truth? You think the truth matters? I've been burying the truth for decades. It's easy when you own the right people, fund the right campaigns, control the right narratives. This, he gestured at the vault, is just another problem to be managed. Amara had been silent during this exchange, but now she spoke, her young voice cutting through the adult arguments. You can't manage what's inside that safe. My father made sure of it. She walked closer to the vault, ignoring her mother's frightened protest. Her small hand pressed against its surface, feeling the vibrations that spoke of mechanisms coming alive after years of forced sleep. He didn't just seal evidence inside, Amara continued. He built a system. The vault's opening will trigger automated uploads to multiple servers. News organizations, law enforcement agencies, international watchdog groups. He programmed it all 7 years ago, before he died, before you killed him. The last words were directed at Van Dorn, delivered with a certainty that made several people gasp. Van Dorn's composure finally cracked completely. I didn't kill anyone. Your father was unstable, everyone knew it. He took those pills himself, wrote that note himself. I had nothing to do with it. Except you did, Zahir said quietly. I paid you to make the problem go away. I didn't ask how. I didn't want to know. But we both understood what that meant. He looked at Amara, genuine remorse in his eyes. I convinced myself it was necessary. That your father's revelations would destabilize financial markets, cause chaos, hurt innocent people. I told myself I was protecting the greater good. You were protecting your wealth, Miriam said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. You and everyone like you. My husband died because he threatened your money. And we've been running ever since because you couldn't let his daughter live knowing what she knew. We didn't know what she knew, Van Dorn said. We searched everything. Your apartment, your storage units, your relatives' homes. We found nothing. No copies, no evidence, no proof that Marcus had kept anything. Because you were looking in the wrong place, Amara said. You thought like criminals. You assumed he would hide evidence somewhere you could find and destroy it. But my father was smarter than that. She pressed her ear against the vault one more time, listening to the countdown happening inside. He put in plain sight, in a prototype that everyone assumed was destroyed, in a vault that was supposed to protect secrets, not reveal them. Another memory surfaced, clearer than the others. Her father's workshop, late at night. She was supposed to be sleeping, but she had crept downstairs to watch him work. He was hunched over a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling past faster than she could read. What are you doing, Daddy? She had asked. Marcus had turned, startled, then smiled sadly. Building a time capsule, baby girl. But instead of memories, I'm putting in truth. Someday, when the time is right, it'll open all by itself. And people will finally understand what really happened. Will you be there when it opens? She had asked innocently. Marcus's smile had faltered. Maybe not in person, but in every other way that matters, yes. I'll be there. Amara blinked away the memory, focusing on the present. 1 minute, she announced. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew louder. Multiple people moving with military precision. Caleb tensed, his hand moving to his weapon. Van Dorn's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, then ended the call without speaking. When he looked up, his face had gone blank, the expression of a man who had run out of options and was calculating his final moves. My extraction team is in position, he said flatly, but they've encountered resistance. It seems Zahir's security personnel called in reinforcements before communications were jammed. There's a standoff in the stairwell. Zahir pulled out his own phone, checking a secure app that apparently still worked despite the jamming. Not just my team. Someone triggered federal protocols. There are FBI agents in the building. Ow! Van Dorn demanded. Everything was blocked. Caleb held up his radio, which was now functioning again. I use a dead man switch. If I don't check in every 15 minutes, an automated alert goes to federal authorities with my location and a pre-recorded message about a security incident. You jammed regular communications, but you couldn't block a system that was already running. Van Dorn stared at him with something like admiration mixed with hatred. You planned this. From the moment that girl started talking, you were planning to burn it all down. I was planning to do my job, Caleb corrected. Something I should have done 7 years ago when Marcus Cole's death landed on my desk, and I was ordered to close the investigation without looking too closely. He pulled out a small recording device from his jacket. I've been documenting everything since then. Every suspicious order, every blocked investigation, every time I was told to look the other way. I thought I was gathering evidence for someday. Turns out someday is today. The vault made a different sound now. A series of clicks, rhythmic and purposeful. Locking pins disengaging. Seals releasing. The countdown reaching its final moments. Patricia Holbrook stood up from her chair, straightening her expensive suit with shaking hands. I am testifying. Whatever happens, whatever deals get made, I'm telling everything I know about the board's activities. I want immunity and I want protection, but I'm not going to prison for this. 2 other board members immediately echoed her statement, their voices overlapping in their eagerness to cooperate. The rats were abandoning the ship, and they were doing it with practiced efficiency. Van Dorn watched his empire crumble in real time, his carefully cultivated network of loyalty dissolving in seconds. You're all fools. You think cooperation will save you? They'll squeeze you for information and throw you in prison anyway. At least if we stood together. We're done standing together, Patricia interrupted. Some of us have families, Elliot. Lives that matter more than your schemes. The vault emitted a loud hiss, pressure equalizing. The final seal preparing to release. Amara stepped back from the safe, moving to stand beside her mother. Miriam wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. I am sorry, Miriam whispered. For all the years I made us run. For not fighting back. For teaching you to be invisible. You kept us alive, Amara replied softly. That's all that mattered. But you deserved more than survival. You deserve a life. Amara looked up at her mother with those two old eyes. Maybe now we'll finally have one. Zahir walked toward them slowly, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands clasped in front of him. I know apologies are insufficient, he said, but I offer one anyway. To you, to your mother, and to the memory of your father. He was a better man than I am. He chose truth when I chose expedience. Why? Amara asked. Why did you pay them? You're rich enough that you didn't need whatever dirty money was involved. Zahir's expression was pained. It wasn't about the money I would gain. It was about the money I would lose. The evidence your father collected proved that my fund had knowingly invested in arms networks that supplied both sides of conflicts. We profited from war, from suffering, from the deaths of thousands. He paused, his voice dropping. If that information became public, my fund would collapse. But worse, much worse, my country's sovereign wealth would be implicated. It could have triggered international sanctions, economic warfare, political upheaval. I convinced myself I was protecting my nation. You were protecting yourself, Caleb said bluntly. Nations survive scandals. Careers don't. Zahir nodded slowly. You're right. And I've lived with that truth every day since. Watching news reports about conflicts my money helped fuel. Attending charity galas while knowing the blood on my hands could never wash clean. The vault clicked one final time. Then silence. Everyone in the room held their breath, watching the massive steel door. For a moment, nothing happened. The hum of internal mechanisms faded. The pressure equalizing stopped. Then, with a sound like an exhale, the vault door began to open. Not dramatically, not explosively, just slowly, inevitably, as if it had been waiting for this moment for 7 years and was determined to get it right. The door swung outward on perfectly balanced hinges, revealing the vault's dark interior. Lights flickered on automatically, triggered by sensors that detected the breach. And everyone saw what Amara Cole had left behind. Inside the vault, stacked on reinforced shelves, were rows of small black boxes. Each one was labeled with dates, times, and cryptic alphanumeric codes. Fiber optic cables connected them to a central hub that pulsed with tiny LED lights, green, amber, red, indicating active data streams. But what drew everyone's attention was the large monitor mounted on the vault's back wall. It had powered on the moment the door opened, displaying a simple message in white text on a black background. The Cole archive compiled by Amara Cole in the interest of truth, if you are reading this. The failsafe has triggered, automated distribution has begun. Below the text, a progress bar filled slowly from left to right. Current status, 12% complete. Amara stared at the screen, her father's final message, and felt tears sting her eyes for the first time since entering the boardroom. All those years of running, of hiding, of wondering if her father had died for nothing. Here was the answer. He had built something that couldn't be stopped. Van Dorn pushed past the frozen onlookers, rushing to the vault's interior. He grabbed one of the black boxes, yanking cables free with desperate strength. We can stop it. Destroy the drives, cut the connections. It's too late, Amara said quietly. Those are redundant systems. The data isn't stored locally. My father uploaded everything to distributed networks years ago, before he died. These boxes are just proof that it existed. Caleb moved to the monitor, studying the code, scrolling past on the screen. His intelligence training allowed him to parse what he was seeing. She's right. This is just an interface showing remote transfers. The actual data is stored on encrypted servers distributed across multiple countries. Destroying this equipment won't stop anything. The progress bar continued its steady march toward completion. 15%, 18%, 21%. Zahir approached the vault slowly, his face ashen. He recognized his own signature on documents displayed in thumbnail previews at the bottom of the screen. Wire transfer confirmations. Encrypted communications. Meeting transcripts that should have been destroyed years ago. "Ow," he whispered. "We purged everything. Used military-grade data destruction protocols. My father worked in forensic engineering," Amara explained. He specialized in recovering data that people thought was permanently deleted. Before you try to purge the evidence, he had already copied it. Hidden copies within copies within copies. You destroyed the originals, but the backups survived. The door to the boardroom burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded in, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. Everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them. The remaining board members dropped immediately, their expensive clothes crumpling against the marble floor. Van Dorn stood frozen by the vault, still clutching the black box like it might somehow save him. Caleb raised his hand slowly, his voice calm. "Agent Caleb Wright, retired CIA, currently building security. I'm armed, but standing down. My weapon is holstered." I triggered the federal alert. One of the agents, a woman with sharp eyes and commander insignia, moved forward carefully. "Agent Reeves, FBI. What's the situation?" Caleb gestured toward the vault. "Evidence reveal in progress. Multiple witnesses to financial crimes, conspiracy, and possibly murder. The vault contains documented proof currently being distributed to law enforcement agencies worldwide." Reeves looked at the monitor, at the progress bar, now showing 34%, and her expression shifted from tactical alertness to something closer to awe. "Is that what I think it is?" "The Cole archive," Caleb confirmed. "Compiled by Marcus Cole 7 years ago. It's been sealed until now." Reeves turned to her team. "Secure the room. Nobody touches anything. Get our cyber team up here immediately." She pulled out her radio. "Command, this is Reeves. We have a major evidence release in progress. I need senior agents, legal counsel, and a media blackout on this floor. Now." More agents poured in, establishing a perimeter. They separated Van Dorn, Zahir, and the board members, reading rights and taking initial statements. Camera crews from the FBI's evidence response team began documenting everything, their equipment clicking and whirring in the chaos. Amara and Miriam were guided to a corner of the room, away from the immediate action, but still within the secure perimeter. An agent brought them chairs and bottles of water, treating them more like witnesses than suspects. Agent Reeves approached them carefully, crouching down to Amara's eye level. "I'm going to need to ask you some questions, but first I want to make sure you're okay. Are either of you hurt?" Amara shook her head. "We're fine. Can you tell me your name?" "Amara Cole. This is my mother, Miriam." Reeves's expression changed, recognition dawning. "Cole, as in Marcus Cole. My father." Reeves sat back on her heels, processing. "Your father's case has been reopened 3 times over the past 7 years. Each time, it got shut down by people with enough power to make it go away. A lot of good agents have wanted answers about what really happened to him. He didn't kill himself," Amara said firmly. "Someone murdered him and made it look like suicide. The evidence is in that vault." Reeves glanced back at the monitor, which now showed 47% complete. "I believe you. And based on what I'm seeing, a lot of other people are about to believe you too." The vault continued its steady revelation. The small black boxes hummed with activity, their LED lights blinking in complex patterns as terabytes of data flowed through fiber optic cables to networks that span the globe. On the monitor, thumbnail previews cycled through documents faster than anyone could read them. Financial statements showing billions in illegal transactions. Emails discussing bribes and political manipulation. Audio files of phone calls where powerful men casually discussed destroying lives. Photographs of meetings that officially never happened. And buried in all of that data, a special file marked with a simple title, Amara Cole, Final Testament. Agent Reeves noticed the file as it flashed past. Can we access that? One of the cyber technicians who had arrived nodded. Give me a minute. His fingers flew across a laptop keyboard, interfacing with the vault system. The main monitor flickered, then displayed the contents of Amara Cole's final message. It was a video file. The technician pressed play. Amara Cole appeared on screen, younger than Amara remembered but still recognizable. He sat in what looked like a basement workshop, surrounded by tools and electronics. His face was tired but determined. My name is Amara Cole. The recording began. If you're watching this, it means I'm probably dead, and the failsafe I built into Vault Protocol 7 has triggered. I want to explain why I did this. The room went completely silent. Even the agents stopped moving, transfixed by the dead man's confession. Marcus continued, his voice steady. For 5 years, I worked as a forensic security engineer. My job was to build systems that protected financial evidence during criminal investigations. I was good at it. Maybe too good. He paused, rubbing his face with both hands. 3 years ago, I was approached by a consortium of investors. They wanted me to design a vault that could preserve evidence indefinitely. They said it was for protecting whistleblowers, for keeping documentation safe from government overreach. I believed them. His expression darkened. I was wrong. They wanted the technology so they could control evidence, store it, modify it, or destroy it at will. When I realized what they were doing, I tried to back out. They wouldn't let me. Marcus leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera. So I did something they didn't expect. I documented everything. Every meeting, every transaction, every crime they committed or enabled. I built that documentation into the very system they hired me to create. He smiled grimly. The vault they think protect their secrets is actually counting down to their exposure, and nothing they can do will stop it. The video showed Marcus typing on a laptop, lines of code streaming past. If a programmed a thermal failsafe. If the vault remains improperly sealed, which it will, because they'll try to lock it before the data sync completes, internal pressure differentials will gradually increase over approximately 7 years. Then the lock will fail, the vault will open, and everything I've documented will automatically upload to law enforcement agencies, news organizations, and human rights groups worldwide. He looked directly into the camera, and it was like he was speaking to everyone in the room. I know this might cost me my life. I know the people I'm exposing are powerful enough to make me disappear. But some things matter more than survival. Some truths are worth dying for. Marcus's expression softened then, and he seemed to be looking at someone beyond the camera. Amara, baby girl, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow up. I'm sorry I'm leaving you and your mother alone. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. Tears streamed down Amara's face. Miriam sobbed quietly, her hand covering her mouth. Marcus smiled, and it was the smile Amara remembered from bedtime stories and morning pancakes and all the ordinary moments that had made up their life together. Be smart, be brave, and never let anyone tell you that the truth doesn't matter. It's the only thing that really does. The video ended, the screen returning to the progress bar. 68% complete. Agent Reeves stood slowly, her professional composure struggling against visible emotion. That's a confession of conspiracy to commit murder if I've ever seen one. He knew they would kill him. And he did it anyway, Caleb said quietly. He built a weapon made of truth and set it to detonate 7 years after his death. That's not just brave. That's strategic genius. Zahir, who had been silent during the video, finally spoke. His voice was hollow. I paid $500 million to Elliot Van Dorn to ensure this never saw daylight. I thought I was buying protection. Instead, I was funding my own destruction. Van Dorn, still surrounded by federal agents, laughed bitterly. We all were, Zahir. Amara Cole outsmarted us from beyond the grave. The man we killed continued fighting years after we thought the threat was contained. You're admitting to murder? Agent Reeves asked sharply, gesturing for her officers to document the statement. Van Dorn seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. What's the point in denying it? The evidence is right there. audio recordings, financial transactions, probably even the name of the asset who administered the pills and forged the suicide note. It's over. The progress bar hit 85%. Around the world, in newsrooms and government offices and human rights organizations, encrypted files were arriving. Journalists were opening documents that would dominate headlines for years. Prosecutors were reviewing evidence that would launch 1,000 investigations. Activists were discovering proof of crimes they had suspected but never been able to prove. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and no amount of money or power could put it out. At 93%, the monitor displayed a new message. Distribution complete, backup, copies, secured verification in progress. The truth is now public. Amara stared at the words, her father's final gift to her and to the world. All those years of wondering if he had died for nothing, if his sacrifice had mattered. Here was the answer, displayed in simple white text on a black screen. He had won. Agent Reeves turned to her team. I need full forensic analysis of everything in that vault. Chain of custody on every piece of equipment. And someone get the director on the phone. We're going to need authorization for what comes next. She looked at Van Dorn and Zahir, then at the board members still lying on the floor. Everyone here is being detained for questioning. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise it until your attorneys arrive. Patricia Holbrook raised her hand slightly from her position on the floor. I want to cooperate. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. We'll discuss terms, Reeves replied. But I can't make promises until I know what we're dealing with. The monitor flickered one final time, displaying a personal message that only appeared for 30 seconds before fading. For Amara, remember that locks can protect or reveal, hide or expose. Your father loved you more than any secret was worth keeping. Make him proud. Dad. Amara read the words through her tears, memorizing them, holding them close. Miriam pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, both of them crying openly now. He did it, Miriam whispered. Marcus actually did it. He protected you the only way he knew how. He protected everyone, Amara replied softly. He just had to die to do it. The vault stood open, its secrets finally revealed after 7 years of patient waiting. The failsafe had worked exactly as designed. Imperfect seal creating gradual pressure, thermal cycles counting down the years, truth patiently preparing for its moment. Marcus Cole had built a time bomb, but instead of explosions and destruction, it delivered something far more powerful. It delivered justice. The first news alert hit within 20 minutes of the vault opening. A major international publication led with the headline, The Cole Archive, Billionaire financier implicated in decades of financial crime. Within an hour, every major news outlet in the world was running versions of the same story. The evidence was too substantial to ignore, too well documented to dismiss as conspiracy theory. Marcus Cole had spent 5 years building an airtight case, and now it was flooding into public consciousness with the force of a dam breaking. Amara watched it unfold from a secure federal facility where she and her mother had been taken for protection. They sat in a comfortable room that tried very hard not to look like an interrogation space. Soft chairs, warm lighting, a table with coffee and snacks that neither of them had touched. Agent Reeves sat across from them, her laptop open and displaying a news feed that updated every few seconds with new developments. This is unprecedented, she said quietly. I've worked financial crimes for 15 years, and I've never seen anything release with this kind of coordination. Your father built something remarkable. He built a weapon, Miriam said softly, and it cost him everything. Reeves nodded. But it's working. Van Dorn is in federal custody. Zahir al-Rashid surrendered to authorities in his home country an hour ago. 3 board members have already requested immunity deals in exchange for testimony. She pulled up another article. And it's not just them. The evidence your father collected traces through networks we've been investigating for years, but could never penetrate. Arms dealers, corrupt politicians, money launderers, they're all connected, and now we have the proof. Amara looked at the screen, watching her father's legacy unfold in real time. Part of her felt vindicated, justified, proud. But another part, the part that was still a 13-year-old girl who had lost her father, just felt tired. "What happens to us now?" she asked. Reeves's expression softened. "You're both material witnesses in what's going to be the largest financial crime prosecution in decades. That means protection, relocation if you want it, and support for as long as you need it. We've been relocating for 7 years," Miriam said bitterly. "Running from shadows, jumping at every sound. I'm tired of being afraid." "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Reeves assured her. "The people who threatened you are either in custody or on the run. And with this much public attention, harming you would only prove the allegations true." She closed her laptop and leaned forward. "I want you to understand something. What your father did, what you helped reveal, is going to change things. Not overnight, not perfectly, but meaningfully. There are already calls for congressional investigations, international tribunals, financial regulatory reform. Marcus Cole's sacrifice is going to matter." Amara looked at her mother, seeing exhaustion and relief warring in her expression. "Can we go home?" "Where is home?" Reeves asked gently. The question hung in the air. They had moved 6 times in 7 years, never staying anywhere long enough to call home. Their current apartment was a furnished rental in a neighborhood neither of them particularly liked. Home had stopped being a place and become a concept they barely remembered. "I don't know," Amara admitted. "Then we'll figure it out," Reeves said. "Together. But first, we need to process your statements, document everything that happened tonight, and make sure you're both safe." The following days blurred together. Statements and depositions. Meetings with prosecutors who explained legal proceedings in careful, simplified language. Phone calls from journalists that Reeves's team screened and politely declined. Amara refused every interview request. She had no interest in becoming the face of her father's revelation, in being turned into a symbol or a story. She had done what needed to be done. Opened the vault, told the truth, survived. That was enough. Van Dorn's arrest had been quiet, professional. No perp walk, no cameras, just federal agents escorting him into an unmarked vehicle. But the silence was somehow louder than spectacle would have been. This was real justice, not theater. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other counts that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. His attorneys immediately began negotiating, but there was nothing to negotiate. The evidence was absolute. Zahir's case was more complex. His voluntary surrender and cooperation earned him consideration, but the crimes he had enabled were too severe to ignore. His sovereign wealth fund was frozen, triggering a financial crisis in his home country that required international intervention. The man who had tried to protect his nation by hiding the truth had inadvertently endangered it by being exposed. Still, there was something honorable in how he faced the consequences. He testified fully, withholding nothing, accepting responsibility for decisions he had tried to rationalize for years. In court documents that became public, he wrote an open apology to Amara and Miriam, acknowledging that no words could repair what had been taken from them. Caleb Wright resigned from private security and offered his services as a consultant to the FBI's investigation. His recordings and documentation provided crucial corroboration for evidence from the vault. He testified before Congress about how corporate security had been weaponized to protect criminals, his words helping shape new oversight legislation. In a brief conversation with Amara weeks after the vault opening, he told her something that stuck with her. "Your father was braver than any soldier I served with. He went to war armed only with truth, and he won. That's something worth remembering." Patricia Holbrook's immunity deal was approved after extensive negotiation. She provided testimony that implicated 17 other executives and led to the collapse of 3 major corporations. Her cooperation was strategic rather than ethical, but the results were the same. Criminals faced justice. The other board members received varying sentences based on their level of involvement and willingness to cooperate. Some went to prison. Some paid enormous fines and accepted probation. All of them lost the wealth and status they had spent their lives accumulating. 3 months after the vault opened, Amara stood in a courtroom during Van Dorn's sentencing hearing. She didn't testify. Her video deposition had already been entered into evidence, but the judge had invited her to be present if she wished. Van Dorn looked smaller than she remembered. Prison clothing, no expensive suit. His silver hair had grayed further. His hands were cuffed in front of him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Van Dorn stood slowly. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the floor. Then he looked directly at Amara. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Not because I was caught. Not because of what I'm about to lose. I'm sorry because you were right, and I knew at the moment you questioned that vault. I knew your father had built something I couldn't stop, and I tried to threaten you anyway. I tried to make you disappear like I made him disappear. That's unforgivable." He paused, swallowing hard. "Your father was a better man than I ever was, and you're braver than any adult in that boardroom. I hope someday you can have the childhood I stole from you." The judge sentenced him to 43 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Van Dorn accepted it without appeal. As Amara left the courtroom, a journalist called out, "How does it feel to see justice served?" She stopped, considering the question. "How did it feel?" "Empty," she said honestly. "My father is still dead. 7 years of my life are still gone. Justice doesn't give those back." She walked away before anyone could ask follow-up questions. But that night, lying in bed in their new apartment, a real apartment that they had chosen together, that they could stay in as long as they wanted, Amara realized that empty wasn't quite accurate. Justice felt like closure, like a weight being lifted, like finally being able to exhale after holding her breath for 7 years. It didn't fix everything, but it was a beginning. 6 months after the vault opened, Amara walked into Jefferson Middle School for her first day as a normal student. She wore new clothes, carried a new backpack, and had a schedule of classes that didn't include plans for emergency evacuation. It felt strange, foreign, terrifying in a way that facing billionaires had never been. Making friends when you've spent 7 years learning to be invisible is harder than cracking safes. But slowly, carefully, she began to build a life that wasn't defined by running or hiding or waiting for the next crisis. She joined a robotics club because machines made sense in ways people sometimes didn't. She discovered she was good at math and terrible at volleyball. She learned that normal teenage problems, homework, social dynamics, awkward conversations, were exhausting but also kind of wonderful in their mundanity. Miriam stopped cleaning offices. With the settlement from Van Dorn's seized assets and a victim compensation fund established from recovered illegal proceeds, they had enough money to live comfortably. Not extravagantly. Neither of them wanted that kind of attention, but safely. Miriam went back to school herself, pursuing a degree in social work. She wanted to help other families who were running from powerful people who needed someone to tell them they weren't crazy for being afraid. "Marcus would have liked this," she told Amara one evening, turning all that pain into something useful. The vault itself was placed in federal evidence storage, classified as the Cole safe in official documentation. It became a teaching tool for security professionals and a case study in forensic engineering. Marcus Cole's name was cleared completely, with official acknowledgments from multiple government agencies recognizing his contribution to financial crime prevention. A scholarship fund was established in his name, funded by portions of the recovered illegal assets. It provided financial support for children of whistleblowers, people whose parents had chosen truth over safety and paid the price. Zahir personally contributed an additional $50 million to the fund, one of his final acts before beginning his prison sentence. In the letter accompanying the donation, he wrote that he hoped it would honor the man he should have supported instead of betraying. Amara received a certificate as the first recipient of the Marcus Cole Memorial Scholarship, even though she didn't technically need the money. The ceremony was small, private, attended only by family and a few federal officials who had worked on the case. Agent Reeves was there. So was Caleb Wright. They had both become something like guardians to Amara, checking in regularly, offering support when the weight of everything threatened to become too heavy. During the ceremony, Amara was asked to say a few words. She stood at the podium, looking out at the small gathering, and tried to articulate something that felt true. My father used to tell me that safes don't protect money, she began. They protect choices. Every lock, every seal, every security system is really just a choice someone made about what matters enough to guard. She paused, gathering her thoughts. He chose to guard the truth, and it cost him his life. For a long time, I was angry about that choice. I wanted a father who chose me instead of justice, who chose survival instead of sacrifice. Miriam wiped tears from her eyes, listening. But I understand now, Amara continued. He did choose me. He chose the world he wanted me to grow up in. He chose truth over comfort, justice over safety, and tomorrow over today. That's not abandonment. That's love. She looked down at the certificate in her hands. So this scholarship, this fund, this entire legacy, it's not about money. It's about remembering that some things matter more than surviving. Some truths are worth protecting, even when it costs everything. The applause that followed was quiet, respectful, laden with understanding. Later that evening, Amara sat in her room, sketching mechanical designs. Not safes this time, but systems. Flowcharts and decision trees. Programming logic that could help identify financial crimes before they happened. Prevention rather than revelation. Her father had built a weapon of truth. Maybe she could build a shield. A knock interrupted her work. Miriam entered with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, sitting on the bed beside her daughter. "What are you working on?" she asked. Amara showed her the sketches. "I'm thinking about the future, about what comes after the vault opens." Dad spent 5 years documenting crimes that had already happened. What if someone could build systems that stop them from happening in the first place? Miriam smiled, proud and sad at once. "You sound just like him. Is that okay?" "It's more than okay. It's perfect." They sat together in comfortable silence, sipping hot chocolate and watching Amara's designs take shape. A year after the vault opened, Amara received an unexpected visitor. Zahir had been released temporarily from medical treatment, and he requested permission to meet with her under federal supervision. She agreed, curious despite everything. They met in a neutral location, a federal building conference room, with Agent Reeves present. Zahir looked older, worn by prison and conscience in equal measure. But his eyes were clearer than they had been in Van Dorn Tower. "Thank you for seeing me," he said formally. "I know I have no right to ask for your time." Amara sat across from him, studying his face the way she had studied the vault. "Why did you want to meet?" "To tell you something I should have said a year ago." He leaned forward, his cuffed hands resting on the table. "Your father came to me 3 times before he died. 3 separate occasions where he tried to convince me to help him expose the truth. Each time I refused. I told him he was jeopardizing important work, that he didn't understand the bigger picture." His voice cracked slightly. "The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of losing my wealth, my status, my reputation. I chose fear over honor. And because of that choice, your father died alone, convinced that nobody would help him." Tears traced down Zahir's face. "I want you to know that I think about that every day. Every single day in prison. I remember his face the last time we spoke. The disappointment. Not anger, just disappointment. Like he had expected better from me." Amara absorbed this, processing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know that your father tried. He didn't just document crimes and hope for the best. He actively sought help, gave people chances to do the right thing. We failed him, not the other way around." He reached into his pocket slowly, mindful of the supervising agent, and pulled out a letter. "I wrote this for you. You don't have to read it now or ever, but it explains everything I know about your father's final days. Places he went, people he spoke to, evidence he gathered. I thought you might want to understand his complete story." Amara took the letter, feeling its weight. "Thank you." Zahir stood to leave, then paused. "Your father once told me that history judges us not by our intentions, but by our actions. He was right. I had good intentions and terrible actions. He had difficult circumstances and heroic actions. I hope when you're older, when you look back at all of this, you'll remember that distinction matters." After he left, Amara opened the letter. It was 20 pages long, handwritten, detailing Marcus Cole's final investigation with the precision of a confession and the care of a tribute. She read every word, learning about her father's bravery and persistence and unwavering commitment to truth. By the end, she was crying, but they were different tears than before. Not grief exactly, but recognition. Her father had been extraordinary, and she was his daughter. 2 years after the vault opened, Amara gave her first and only interview. Not to a major news network or magazine, but to a small journalism nonprofit that focused on financial crime reporting. She agreed because they had been using her father's evidence responsibly, pursuing real accountability rather than sensationalism. The interviewer asked the question everyone wanted to know. Looking back, do you regret opening that vault? Amara considered carefully before answering. I didn't open the vault. My father designed it to open itself when the time was right. I was just there when it happened. But you could have walked away. You could have taken Van Dorn's money and disappeared. No, Amara said firmly. I couldn't have, because my father didn't raise me to believe that money matters more than truth. He raised me to believe that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. She looked directly at the camera. He offered me $100 million, but all I wanted was the truth. And the truth is worth more than any amount of money, because it's the only thing that actually changes the world. The interview ended there. Amara had said what needed saying. Years later, when Amara graduated high school with honors and acceptance letters from 6 prestigious engineering programs, Miriam asked her what she wanted to study. Forensic systems engineering, Amara replied without hesitation. I want to build the next generation of security systems, not for protecting secrets, but for protecting truth. Systems that make it harder to hide crimes and easier to reveal them. Following in your father's footsteps? Amara smiled. No, walking beside them. He showed me the path. Now I get to choose how to walk it. On graduation day, Amara wore her father's watch, the only possession of his that Miriam had kept through all their running. It no longer worked, stopped at exactly 11:47, the moment Marcus had died. But Amara wore it anyway, a reminder that time can stop for a person, but never for truth. Eventually, inevitably, truth finds its way forward. In her valedictorian speech, she told the assembled students and parents about safes and secrets, about choices and consequences, about a father who loved truth more than life, and a daughter who learned that lesson through grief. We all protect something, she concluded. The question is what? Money? Reputation? Comfort? Or something more important? Something that matters beyond ourselves, beyond our lifetime, beyond any measurement of personal gain. She touched her father's watch. My father chose truth. And because of that choice, I get to stand here today, free and safe and proud. That's his real treasure. Not the evidence he collected, not the criminals he exposed, but the world he helped create. A world where truth matters more than power, where justice outweighs wealth, where one person's courage can change everything. The applause that followed echoed through the auditorium, and Amara felt her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. He had offered the world $100 million joke. She had given them something priceless in return. The truth. If someone offered you $100 million to stay silent about the truth, would you take it? Hit like if this story moved you, and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the price of truth.